The metallic sound of the old water pump echoed across the green fields of Heritage Springs Farm, a property that for more than a century had nurtured not only the land, but also the hopes and dreams of 5 generations of the Lee family. Christopher Lee, a 45-year-old man with calloused hands and determined eyes, watched the rhythmic movement of the mechanism that pumped water from the century-old artesian well, an inheritance from his great-grandfather, one of the first settlers in Millbrook Valley, Idaho. On that June morning, while inspecting the rows of organic vegetables that supplied the local markets, Christopher couldn't have imagined that his life was about to be transformed by a dispute that would shake the very foundations of his existence. The sun had not yet reached its zenith when a gleaming Range Rover SUV parked at the entrance to the estate, raising a cloud of dust that hovered over the meticulously tended crops. Susan Baker, a retired Silicon Valley executive who had recently built an ostentatious mansion in the valley, emerged from the vehicle wearing a designer gym outfit and sunglasses that cost more than a month's sales of the estate. His ornamental garden and Olympic-sized swimming pool had become the main topic of meetings of the Millbrook Heights Homeowners Association, a newly built luxury condominium that bordered Christopher's farm. "Mr. Lee," Susan called out, in a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to having his wishes granted immediately. "We need to discuss access to your well water. As the new president of the HOA, I believe that natural resources should be shared by the community." Christopher took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations of farmers on his shoulders. "Mrs. Baker, as I explained over the phone, this well is not just a source of water. It's the heart of this farm and the livelihood of dozens of families who depend on our produce." The conversation that followed was tense, with Susan brandishing arguments about community rights and sustainable development that sounded more like elaborate justifications for her own ambitions. Christopher stood his ground, patiently explaining the historical documentation, environmental permits, and water rights his family had held for decades. "You don't understand, Mr. Lee," Susan insisted, her voice taking on a menacing tone. "Millbrook Heights is changing the profile of this region. We can't have an old farm limiting our growth potential. Either you cooperate, or you will face legal consequences." The following week, Christopher received a court summons. Susan Baker had filed a lawsuit claiming that the artesian well should be considered communal property, citing distorted legal precedents and completely ignoring the history of the property. The news spread quickly through the small community of Millbrook Valley. Some older residents, who knew the value of Lee Farm to the local economy, offered their support. Others, especially the new residents of the luxury condominium, aligned themselves with Susan, seeing an opportunity to increase the value of their properties at the expense of a century-old farm. Victoria Martinez, a local lawyer specializing in environmental and agrarian law, showed up at Christopher's makeshift office, housed in the farm's old barn. "I read about your case in the local paper," she said, her eyes revealing a mixture of concern and determination. "What's happening here is more than just a dispute over water. It's a clash between 2 worlds, 2 visions of how our community should be." Christopher spent hours with Victoria, sharing yellowed documents that proved the legitimacy of his rights over the well. The lawyer was particularly interested in a state decree from 1892 that guaranteed perpetual water rights to the Lee family, in recognition of their role in the agricultural development of the region. "This won't be an easy battle," Victoria warned, carefully organizing the documents. "Susan Baker has resources and connections. She has already secured the support of some city council members who see real estate development as the future of Millbrook Valley." As the sun sets over the fields of Heritage Springs Farm, Christopher contemplates the legacy at stake. The lengthening shadows of the century-old trees seem to whisper stories of past generations who faced their own struggles to preserve this piece of land. The looming conflict isn't just about water or property. It's about the right to keep alive a way of life that has nourished not just one family, but an entire community for more than a century. Night falls over Millbrook Valley, and the lights of Susan Baker's mansion glow in the distance as a constant reminder of the battle to come. Christopher knows that the coming days will test not only his resolve, but also the strength of the roots his family planted in this land so long ago. With Victoria by his side and the support of the ancient community, he is preparing to defend not only his well, but an entire legacy of sustainability and agricultural tradition that his family has built over generations. News of Susan Baker's lawsuit against Christopher Lee spread through Millbrook Valley like fire through dry straw. At the small local grocery store, Harvest Market, where Christopher had been selling his organic produce for years, older residents gathered to discuss the case, turning the establishment into a kind of informal community forum. Margaret Wilson, who has owned the market for 3 decades, was carefully organizing the fresh tomatoes from Heritage Springs Farm while chatting with other traders. "My family has been buying vegetables from the Lees since I was a kid," she commented, adjusting her gold-framed glasses. "This farm has fed our town for generations." Victoria Martinez spent the morning in the municipal library, immersing herself in historical documents that could strengthen Christopher's case. Among the piles of dusty records, she discovered something intriguing. The Lee family's ARTESIAN well had been instrumental during the Great Drought of 1947, when it helped sustain not only the farm, but the entire local community. Meanwhile, Susan Baker did not remain idle. In her 3-story mansion, she organized a meeting with other residents of Millbrook Heights. The main hall, decorated with contemporary works of art and imported furniture, was filled with new residents eager to turn the rural valley into a luxurious haven. "Think of the potential," Susan argued, gesturing with a glass of premium red wine. "With access to this water source, we could turn this whole area into an oasis. Golf courses, ornamental lakes, fountains. Millbrook Valley could become Idaho's new elite destination." Robert Preston, a newly arrived real estate developer, smiled approvingly. "I already have buyers interested in luxury lots, but they want guarantees about water resources before they invest." On the other side of town, Christopher found unexpected support. Daniel Thompson, a retired local historian, showed up at the farm carrying a box of old documents. "I've found something you need to see," he said, spreading yellowed papers on the kitchen table. "They're records of your family's contribution during the Second World War, when the farm was essential to the war effort, providing food for the troops." Victoria received the new information with enthusiasm. "It strengthens our position," she explained. "It shows that the well and the farm have a historical significance that transcends private ownership. It's a cultural heritage of the community." Tension in the town increased daily. In the local supermarket, customers argued heatedly about the case. Some defended the Lee family's historic property rights, while others, especially the new residents, argued that progress was inevitable. Christopher, pressured by the situation, decided to organize an open day at the estate. Dozens of residents attended, including families who had been buying their produce for years and children from local schools who visited the property on educational excursions. "This well is not just a source of water," Christopher explained to the group gathered near the century-old irrigation system. "It's a symbol of sustainability. Every drop is used responsibly to produce food that feeds our community." The public demonstration had an unexpected effect. Jennifer Howard, a journalist from the Idaho Chronicle who was present at the event, published a detailed article about the history of the farm and its importance for local food security. The article went viral on social media, drawing national attention to the conflict. Susan Baker, angered by the growing public opinion in favor of Christopher, stepped up her campaign. She hired a prestigious law firm from Boise, the state capital, specializing in real estate law. The legal team began pressuring the city council to review the region's old water concessions. Victoria, anticipating her opponent's moves, worked tirelessly to build a solid defense. She discovered legal precedents in other states where courts had protected historic water rights against appropriation attempts by real estate developers. They have money and influence. Victoria warned Christopher during a strategy meeting, "But we have history, legitimacy, and the support of the community on our side." The conflict began to affect the daily routine of the farm. Christopher noticed hostile looks from some residents of the condominium while working in his fields. Posters began to appear on the property's fences, some supporting the Lee family, others demanding a fair share of the water resources. On a particularly tense afternoon, Susan showed up at the farm again, this time accompanied by her lawyer and a hydraulic engineer. "We've come to do a technical assessment of the well," she announced with an artificial smile. "It's just standard procedure for the process." Christopher, backed by Victoria, denied access to the property without a court order. The confrontation, witnessed by neighbors, turned out to be another chapter in the growing saga dividing the community. While the legal battle intensified, Christopher found solace in his daily routines on the farm. Working the land, tending the crops and committing to sustainable agriculture constantly reminded him of what was at stake. It wasn't just a dispute over water, but a fight to preserve a way of life that had sustained generations and shaped Millbrook Valley's identity. Night fell over the farm, and Christopher lay awake in his study, examining old family photographs. In one of them, his great-grandfather stood beside the newly built well, proud of the legacy he was creating. That black-and-white image carried the weight of a century of history, reminding him of the responsibility he had in his hands. The battle was just beginning, and the future of Heritage Springs Farm hung by a thread. The first weeks of August brought not only the sweltering heat typical of Idaho, but also an escalation in the conflict dividing Millbrook Valley. The tension reached its peak when Susan Baker, frustrated by the initial legal obstacles, decided to change her strategy. During a special city council meeting, she presented an elaborate plan for community revitalization that, between the lines, threatened the very existence of Heritage Springs Farm. "What we are proposing," Susan declared with a calculated smile, "is a complete modernization of the local water system. This includes municipalizing all historic artesian wells for efficient and equitable use." The council room, packed with residents, erupted into heated discussion. Victoria Martinez, sitting next to Christopher, scribbled furiously on her notepad. "She's trying to circumvent our property rights through municipal regulation," she whispered. "It's clever, but it won't work." The lawyer was not alone in her assessment. Harold Whitman, a retired judge and respected community member, stood up during the public comment session. "In 40 years in the judiciary," his deep voice echoed through the room, "I have never seen such a transparent attempt at misappropriation disguised as a public good." While the battle raged at City Hall, Christopher faced more immediate challenges at the farm. Someone had vandalized the irrigation system during the night, causing significant damage to the plantation. Suspicion fell on some Millbrook Heights residents, although nothing could be proved. Margaret Wilson, from Harvest Market, organized a fundraising campaign to help with the repairs. "Look at this," she told customers, showing an old photo of the local farmers market. "Before these luxury condos, we were a community that supported each other." The story took on a new dimension when Jennifer Howard, a journalist for the Idaho Chronicle, discovered connections between the law firm hired by Susan and a major real estate development planned for the area. Her investigative article revealed that the revitalization plan was part of a larger project to transform Millbrook Valley into an exclusive tourist destination. "It's not just about a swimming pool or an ornamental garden," Christopher explained during an interview. "It's about preserving a sustainable way of life that has nourished this community for generations." The community's response was immediate. Farmers from neighboring towns, fearing that their properties could be the next target, began to organize. A coalition of farmers was formed, with Christopher reluctantly taking a leading role. Victoria seized the moment to file a legal counter-petition. She discovered that the Lee well was protected by a special clause in the state's water code, established during the Great Depression to protect productive family farms. "What Susan is trying to do," Victoria explained during a coalition meeting, "is not only illegal, it's a direct attack on our agricultural heritage." Tensions reached a new level when Susan organized a protest outside Heritage Springs Farm. Dozens of residents of the condominium, many of whom had never set foot on a farm before, carried placards demanding equal access to natural resources. Christopher was watching the scene from the balcony of his century-old home when he noticed something peculiar. Among the protesters was Robert Preston, the real estate developer, discreetly photographing different angles of the property. Victoria, who was present, immediately recognized the implications. "They're documenting everything," she said, "probably for some kind of real estate appraisal." The discovery led to further investigation. Daniel Thompson, the local historian, spent days researching records of recent real estate transactions. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Several rural properties in the region had been acquired by shell companies linked to a large development conglomerate. "It's bigger than we imagined," Daniel shared his findings with Christopher and Victoria. "They're systematically trying to transform the whole valley." The community began to divide even more clearly into two factions. On one side, the traditional residents and farmers fighting to preserve their way of life. On the other, the new residents attracted by the promise of a luxurious and exclusive future. One evening, while Christopher was working late checking the repaired irrigation system, Susan appeared unexpectedly at the farm. This time her tone was different, softer, almost conciliatory. "We can come to an agreement," she offered, sitting down at the Lee's old kitchen table. "Name your price for the property. You could retire comfortably. No more worrying about droughts or bad harvests." Christopher poured a cup of the coffee his family had grown for generations. "Mrs. Baker," he replied calmly, "some things are priceless. This land isn't just a piece of property to be sold. It's a legacy, a responsibility." The meeting ended in a stalemate, but something had changed. Christopher's quiet determination seemed to have shaken Susan's certainty, if only momentarily. As she drove off in the darkness, Victoria, who had arrived for a late meeting, observed the scene. "She's not going to give up easily," the lawyer commented, "but she's just realized that she's not just dealing with a stubborn farmer. She's up against generations of history and principles." The full moon illuminated the fields of Heritage Springs Farm, and Christopher knew that the battle was far from over. But that night, as the valley slept, he felt a renewed confidence. He wasn't just defending his property. He was protecting a way of life that, perhaps more than ever, the world needed to preserve. Susan Baker's lawsuit against Christopher Lee began to attract national attention when the Washington Post published a cover story about the conflict in Millbrook Valley. The article, titled "Water Wars: The Clash Between Tradition and Luxury," turned the small Idaho town into a symbol of the growing tension between traditional farming communities and high-end real estate development. Victoria Martinez was reviewing the latest motion filed by Susan's legal team when she received a surprising call. It was Marcus Bennett, one of the most respected environmental lawyers in the country. "I read about the case," he said. "I'd like to offer my services pro bono. This conflict could set a crucial precedent for the protection of family farms across the country." The news of Bennett's arrival caused a stir at the law firm that represented Susan. The presence of a nationally renowned lawyer was a complete game-changer. Robert Preston, the real estate developer, called an emergency meeting at the Millbrook Heights Country Club. "We need to act fast," Preston argued, projecting graphs of real estate appreciation. "If we lose this battle, other farmers may feel emboldened to resist the development planned for the valley." Meanwhile, Christopher was facing a new crisis on the farm. The moderate drought had intensified, and the State Department of Water Resources began implementing restrictions on water use. Ironically, while the organic farm reduced its irrigation to comply, the Millbrook Heights mansions kept their ornamental fountains gushing day and night. Jennifer Howard, a journalist for the Idaho Chronicle, published a video that went viral on social media. The drone footage showed a shocking contrast. On one side, the parched fields of Heritage Springs Farm, where Christopher was implementing ancient water conservation techniques. On the other, the overflowing pools and lush lawns of the luxury condominium. The community began to mobilize in unexpected ways. Chefs at Boise's top restaurants announced that they would only work with organic produce from Heritage Springs Farm. Idaho State University students organized peaceful protests in front of Susan Baker's office. "This isn't just about a well anymore," declared Marcus Bennett during an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps. "It's about the future of American family farming and the right of traditional communities to preserve their way of life." Susan, pressured by growing public opinion to the contrary, tried a new approach. Through intermediaries, she offered to buy the farm for 3 times the market value. Christopher refused without hesitation, but the offer revealed the true objective behind the process: the forced acquisition of the property. Victoria and Bennett discovered that Susan's plan was even more elaborate. Leaked documents revealed a strategy to use the precedent of the Lee case to challenge water rights on other rural properties in the valley. The ultimate goal was to force a mass sale of farmland for real estate development. The tension reached its peak when Christopher found his irrigation system completely sabotaged one morning. Newly installed security cameras captured images of 3 men, all employees of a security company hired by Millbrook Heights, vandalizing the equipment in the early hours of the morning. The incident caused an unexpected turn of events. Some residents of the condominium, horrified by the tactics employed, began to question Susan's leadership. Catherine Reynolds, a retired college professor who had recently moved to Millbrook Heights, organized a dissident group within the HOA. "I came here seeking tranquility," Catherine declared during a stormy association meeting, "not to participate in a war against the very people who produce our food." Bennett seized the moment to file a civil suit against Susan Baker and Robert Preston, alleging conspiracy to depreciate private property and attempted misappropriation of natural resources. Evidence included leaked emails and recordings of meetings where they discussed strategies to force Christopher to sell his land. The case took on a new dimension when renowned environmentalists began to speak out. A study conducted by Idaho State University revealed that the sustainable agriculture model practiced at Heritage Springs Farm was crucial to maintaining the valley's ecological balance. Christopher, normally reserved, found his voice as a defender not only of his property, but of a threatened way of life. In a moving speech during a public hearing, he shared the story of 5 generations of his family farming the land with respect and sustainability. "This water is not just a resource to be exploited," he declared, his voice charged with emotion. "It is part of a sacred cycle that sustains not only our farm, but all life in this valley. When we forget that, we lose much more than water. We lose our connection to the land that feeds us." As fall approached, bringing with it the promise of rain, the battle for water from the Artesian well continued to transform Millbrook Valley. What began as a local dispute had become a national symbol of the struggle between preservation and development, between tradition and modernity, between different visions of community and progress. Victoria and Bennett prepared for the closing arguments, knowing that the outcome of this case could influence similar disputes across the country. Christopher, for his part, continued his daily routine on the farm, tending the land as his ancestors had done, aware that some battles transcend courts and legal documents. They are fights for the soul of a community and for the preservation of a legacy that cannot be measured in dollars. The final hearing of the Baker versus Lee case was scheduled for an October morning, when the first golden leaves were beginning to cover Millbrook Valley. The county courthouse, a historic red brick building built in 1912, was packed. Local residents, journalists, and environmental activists crowded into the corridors, all eager to witness the outcome of a battle that had become a national symbol. Marcus Bennett and Victoria Martinez arrived early to go over their final notes. Christopher, wearing his best suit, the same one he had worn to his father's funeral 5 years earlier, watched the sun rise over his land from the courthouse window. Susan Baker entered shortly afterwards, accompanied by her legal team and Robert Preston, her high heels echoing across the marble floor. "All rise," announced the bailiff as Judge Eleanor Blackburn entered the room. A veteran of 3 decades in the judiciary, Blackburn was known for her acumen in cases involving property rights and natural resources. Bennett opened the closing arguments with a meticulous presentation of the history of the artesian well. He projected historical photographs, including one from 1947, showing the Lee farm providing water to neighbors during the Great Drought. This well, he argued, was never just a private source of water. It was a responsibly managed resource, benefiting the entire community through sustainable food production. Susan's team countered by presenting economic feasibility studies and real estate appreciation projections. Millbrook Valley is evolving, argued its lead attorney. We cannot allow historical sentimentality to impede the natural progress of the region. It was then that Catherine Reynolds, the Millbrook Heights dissident, rose to testify. I moved here seeking exclusivity, she admitted, but I discovered something more valuable. A real community, built on mutual respect and sustainability. What Ms. Baker is proposing isn't progress, it's destruction. During her lunch break, Victoria received an urgent call. Daniel Thompson, the local historian, had made a crucial discovery in the state archives. I've found something that changes everything, he gasped. Bring the judge to the historical archives. She needs to see it for herself. Blackburn agreed to the unusual request. In the dusty little archive, Daniel uncovered documents proving that the Lee well had been instrumental in a secret government program during the Cold War, supplying water to strategic underground installations. The federal agreement guaranteed perpetual protection for the property's water rights. Susan visibly paled when the evidence was presented. Robert Preston discreetly left the courtroom, his phone ringing insistently. Jennifer Howard, present to cover the trial, was already typing furiously on her laptop. Judge Blackburn asked for an hour to review the new documents. When she returned, her countenance was grave. In 30 years of judgeship, she began, I have learned that justice does not always lie in the most recent legal precedents, but often in the deepest roots of our communities. Her decision was unequivocal. Not only did it uphold all the historic rights of Heritage Springs Farm, but it also established additional protections against future attempts at appropriation. In addition, he ordered an investigation into predatory land acquisition practices in the valley. Christopher remained seated, quiet, while the room erupted in applause. Victoria hugged him, tears in her eyes. We did it, she whispered. Your family would be proud. In the weeks that followed, Millbrook Valley underwent significant transformations. Susan Baker sold her mansion and left town. The city council, under new leadership, passed legislation protecting historic farms from predatory development. Robert Preston faced federal investigations into his real estate practices. More importantly, the community began to reconnect with its agricultural roots. Catherine Reynolds led a movement to transform the ornamental gardens of Millbrook Heights into community gardens. Margaret's Harvest Market expanded, creating a space dedicated exclusively to local producers. Christopher, for his part, turned part of his farm into an educational center on sustainable agriculture. Students from all over the country began visiting Heritage Springs to learn about centuries-old water conservation and organic farming techniques. One quiet November afternoon, while supervising a group of students learning about traditional irrigation, Christopher found something buried next to the well, an ancient time capsule left by his great-grandfather. Inside, as well as photographs and documents, was a letter. To whoever finds this land is not just soil and water. It is a promise for the future. Take care of it not as an owner, but as a guardian. The real wealth is not in what we take from the land, but in what we leave for the next generations. Victoria, who had become a close friend, was present when he read the letter. Your great-grandfather was right, she commented. Some battles are worth more than money or property. They're about preserving something bigger than ourselves. The water from the well continued to flow, nourishing not only the crops, but also a renewed sense of community in Millbrook Valley. The conflict was over, but its legacy remained, a testament to the power of perseverance, the importance of tradition, and the strength of a community united by values deeper than material interest. As the sun set over the fields of Heritage Springs Farm, Christopher smiled, knowing that the century-old well would continue to sustain not only crops, but also stories, dreams, and hopes for generations to come. The battle for water had become a source of renewal for the entire community, proving that some traditions aren't just worth preserving, they're essential to our shared future.